Hello, everyone, and welcome back to RealFear Files. Tonight, we dive into 9 bone-chilling true accounts from the forgotten corners of Pennsylvania, places where quiet streets hide unspeakable horrors and neighborly smiles mask dark secrets. In this episode, we'll trek through rural landscapes where people vanish without a trace, strange creatures lurk in the shadows, and long-buried crimes refuse to stay hidden. Every story you're about to hear has been carefully reconstructed from first-hand witness accounts, police records, and the memories of those who lived to tell the tale. These are not tales of fiction. These are real nightmares that haunt real people in real towns. To protect the safety and privacy of survivors and their families, some names and details have been altered. But the terror at the heart of each story remains raw and unfiltered. If this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe to RealFear Files for daily true horror content that will chill you to your core. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when the shadows creep closer and the next terrifying truth comes to light. Back in late 2019, I took a gig that still haunts me when I think about it. I've only ever shared this story in bits with folks I trust because some of it still gnaws at my mind. I was 28 and desperate. Life had been hammering me, lost my job in Pittsburgh, savings drained, and I needed a fast way to make ends meet. So, I ended up taking the overnight shift at a gas station in a tiny Pennsylvania town called Coleridge. Names changed here, but the place really exists. The town was a ghost of its former self, wedged between dark, forested hills and abandoned coal mines that had been shut down since the 70s. Only about 800 souls lived there now, mostly older folks who had nowhere else to go. Young people dipped out as soon as they could. The pay at the station was crap, but rent was cheap, and I figured I could scrape together enough cash in 6 months to get back on my feet. The store, Quick Stop, sat right on the edge of town, along Route 29, the only road that really mattered in Coleridge. My shift ran 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Most nights, it was dead silent. I'd see maybe 10 people, truckers hauling goods, locals grabbing smokes and lottery tickets before heading to work at the lumber mill 20 miles south. It was lonely, but I didn't mind. I read, watched videos on my phone, and restocked shelves that barely needed it. There was one regular who always showed up around 2 a.m. Gerald. Late 50s, maybe early 60s, thinning gray hair, heavy-set. Always wore the same navy blue work jacket, sleeves caked in oil stains, a faded logo I could never make out. Polite, quiet, nothing personal. He bought a pack of cigarettes, black coffee, maybe a ham sandwich, and paid with exact change from a leather coin purse tucked in his pocket. We'd exchange small talk about the Steelers, the weather, never more than that. He carried that weary, beaten-down vibe you see in men from towns like Coleridge, like life had already ground them down. For the first 2 months, he came like clockwork. Then, late September, he vanished. At first, I shrugged it off. People change routines. Maybe he switched shifts. Maybe he moved. But after a week, then 2, then 3, my gut started nagging. I mentioned it to my manager, Carol, who had run Quick Stop forever. She brushed it off, saying, "People come and go in Coleridge. Don't read too much into it." But I couldn't shake it. Something was wrong. By mid-October, the worry gnawed at me during a slow night. I asked other regulars if they'd seen him. Most shrugged. One older guy, Frank, said Gerald used to maintain one of the old mining sites, but he hadn't seen him lately either. That night, I did something stupid. I looked him up in the store's loyalty database. Gerald had signed up years ago. Full name, Gerald Eugene Kepler. I scribbled it on a scrap of receipt paper, drove home after my shift, and started digging online. Nothing. No social media, no news, no obits. I found a property record. Gerald owned a small house on Maple Street in Coleridge, about 2 miles from the store. Single family, built in '62. No phone number, no relatives listed. I told myself to leave it. Not my business. But my mind wouldn't let it go. What if something had happened to him? In Coleridge, someone could vanish in their own house for days before anyone noticed. 2 nights later, I drove past his place after my shift. Pale dawn sky, empty street. The house was a small, sagging single-story with peeling paint and an overgrown yard. Mailbox stuffed with envelopes. No lights. No movement. I parked across the street, heart thudding, and stared. I walked up to the front porch, knocked. Silence. Knocked harder. Still nothing. I should have called police then, but I didn't. Maybe I thought they'd brush it off. Maybe I just wanted to know. The door handle turned. Unlocked. The second I stepped in, the air hit me. Stale. Wrong. Like the house had been sealed tight for weeks. I called out his name, my voice echoing. Dust everywhere. Curtains drawn. Furniture untouched. A half-full glass on the kitchen table. A newspaper from September 20th. Boots caked with dried mud by the door. No sign of struggle, just frozen in time abandonment. Room by room, nothing. Bedroom made, closet half empty. Bathroom, toothbrush in cup. It was like Gerald had just walked out one morning and vanished. My chest tightened when I noticed a door at the end of the hall I'd thought was a closet. Narrow staircase spiraling down. Cold, damp air rose from the basement, faint dripping sounds echoing. I flicked on my phone flashlight and descended. Concrete floor, exposed beams, stacks of old furniture and boxes. In the far corner, a newer, reinforced door with a heavy deadbolt. My stomach flipped. I found a key hanging on a nail behind a support beam. Hands shaking, I unlocked it. The room inside will haunt me forever. 10 by 10 feet, cinder block walls, a bare bulb swinging. Floor stained dark, something I refused to identify. Against the back wall, a metal shelf stacked with identical black composition notebooks. On another, jars of rings, necklaces, watches. Photos pinned to walls, Polaroids of people. Some bound and gagged, others just staring portraits. Center of the room, a wooden chair with restraints on arms and legs. I stumbled backward, mind reeling. Trembling, I dialed 911, whispered my location and what I'd found. Dispatcher told me to get outside immediately. Less than 10 minutes later, patrol cars, state troopers, forensics, detectives flooded the street. They taped off the block. I was questioned for hours. Local cops, then state investigators, then the FBI. Piece by piece, the story unfolded. Notebooks revealed meticulous records of abductions, assaults, and murders spanning 15 years. Gerald Eugene Kepler wasn't just a quiet gas station regular. He was a serial predator, preying on drifters, sex workers, transient folks who might never be missed. Polaroids matched at least 11 missing persons across 3 states. Trophies in jars. Evidence of disposal using abandoned mines and tunnels around Coleridge. 6 remains were found, others presumed buried forever. His truck was abandoned in an Ohio Walmart lot 3 days before I found the house. Security footage shows him vanishing into the woods. Some think he's dead. Others fear he's still out there, under a new name, hunting again. I left Coleridge 2 weeks later. I couldn't stay. The house, the journals, the photos, they replayed in my mind every night. Gerald's polite, quiet smile now feels like a mask, hiding horrors beyond imagination. Monsters don't always look monstrous. They shop at the same stores, make small talk, smile, and hide unspeakable evil behind ordinary faces. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And if you stumble on a situation like mine, don't hesitate. Call authorities. You might be the only barrier between a predator and their next victim. Even after I left Coleridge, I couldn't shake that night. Every shadow seemed alive, every small sound made me flinch. I kept replaying the basement in my head, the dark stains, the jars of trinkets, the restraints. Gerald Eugene Kepler wasn't just a random creep. He was methodical, organized, patient. The kind of predator who could hide in plain sight for decades. Investigators dug deep. They scoured the house, the surrounding forest, and the old mining tunnels. Each notebook revealed twisted obsession. Carefully detailed logs of his victims' routines, his planning, even psychological notes. The photos pinned on walls were like a gallery of his control, his power over helpless people. They weren't just random souvenirs, they were proof of horrors no one in that sleepy town suspected could exist. The forensic teams went through abandoned mines for months. Collapsed shafts, flooded pits, hidden crawl spaces, everywhere they searched, they found fragments of the lives he had stolen. 6 confirmed remains were recovered. The others? Presumed entombed where no light would ever touch them again. The scale of his crimes made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. He was like a shadow moving unseen, taking advantage of every weakness. Isolation, trust, loneliness. I kept thinking about how he had smiled politely at me every night, quietly counting out his exact change, asking about the weather. That ordinary face had been the mask hiding an unimaginable nightmare. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him there, in the store, in the dim glow of the fluorescent lights, pretending to be normal while plotting horrors. I wondered how many other towns had their own Geralds, monsters disguised as ordinary people, blending into the rhythm of everyday life. I spent weeks after leaving Coleridge in a haze, trying to process the fear and disbelief. Friends asked why I didn't leave sooner. I told them the truth, but even saying it aloud made it feel unreal. I still dreamt about that basement, the smell of stale air, the faint drip of water echoing like a pulse, counting time in some sick ritual. The journals, stacked neatly, filled with precise notes, made it clear this wasn't a moment of madness. It was decades of planning, refinement, a predator perfecting his methods. I thought about the victims. Drifters, wanderers, people living on the edge, people society had already written off. Gerald had found them, observed them, and taken them without anyone realizing until much later. And the terrifying part? For years, no one suspected him. He had been part of the community, blending in seamlessly. He was friendly, polite, unremarkable. A monster in a man's skin. Every time I think about it, I feel the weight of luck. What if I had gone home after my shift instead of checking the house? What if I hadn't been nosy? What if the basement had been soundproof or the door reinforced beyond my strength? I might have become another entry in his journals. I might have been trapped in a nightmare with no end. That thought still makes my stomach churn. The FBI never found Gerald, and there are 2 schools of thought. Some believe he killed himself once he knew authorities were closing in. Others, scarier to me, think he vanished into the wilderness or a new town, a new identity, waiting for the next transient soul to wander into his path. The uncertainty is maddening. The thought that he could still be out there, smiling and polite, just as he was in Quickstop, keeps me awake some nights. I stopped working night shifts altogether. The thought of fluorescent lights, empty streets, and silent towns became a trigger for anxiety. I avoided isolated areas, abandoned buildings, even the forested edges of my town. Every time I passed a small convenience store late at night, I felt Gerald's presence in my head, imagining his eyes scanning shelves, noting who came and went, pretending to be harmless while plotting horrors. Months later, investigators shared what they could publicly release. The journals were meticulous. He had recorded over 15 years of attacks, each carefully planned. Each victim catalogued with notes, sketches, and sometimes Polaroid images. They recovered items in jars, personal effects taken as trophies, rings, necklaces, watches, all markers of his control, reminders of the lives he had taken. Every recovered artifact felt like a scar on reality itself, evidence that someone could be so evil while hiding behind civility. Coleridge changed after that. The town's quiet, resigned demeanor cracked as people realized the evil living among them for decades. Locals whispered about seeing Gerald, decades ago and recently, imagining him in different disguises. Some still avoid Maple Street entirely, fearing the house and what it represents. The mines were sealed, the surrounding woods patrolled. But the fear lingers, the knowledge that monsters can live among you, polite, quiet, blending into the mundane. I carry that fear with me daily. The police warned me against publicizing details too much, partly for my safety, partly because the investigation is ongoing. Gerald could be anywhere, and that uncertainty breeds a constant tension, a shadow over everything I do. I no longer trust simple acts of kindness from strangers at night, the casual greetings or polite conversation. It's a survival instinct now, shaped by a near encounter with true, methodical evil. Even now, I think about the mornings I served him coffee and cigarettes, the hours of casual banter, the mundane routine that hid the darkness. Every interaction now feels like a missed warning. Every polite stranger a potential mask for something monstrous. That realization still sends chills down my spine. You can never fully see monsters. They don't roar or growl. They smile. They nod. They blend in, hiding behind ordinary lives. I try to live cautiously. I check locks twice, avoid abandoned places, and keep a healthy skepticism about strangers. I warn friends to trust instincts, to notice the tiny details, because predators like Gerald rely on being invisible, ordinary, unnoticed. And they can be anywhere. In a small town, a big city, in someone's workplace, or even a neighbor next door. What haunts me most isn't the basement, the jars, or even the journals. It's the knowledge that someone like Gerald Eugene Kepler existed and thrived without detection for decades. That he walked among people, polite, quiet, unremarkable, while committing horrors beyond imagination. It's a lesson etched into my mind. Monsters don't always look monstrous. They wear everyday masks, and you never know when the man smiling at the counter might be hiding something unspeakable behind ordinary eyes. If there's one takeaway from this, it's to trust your instincts. If something feels off, act on it. Investigate if you can safely do so. And never assume that politeness equals safety. Some of the worst horrors in life are hidden behind the most ordinary faces. Thinking back on it, even years later, my hands still tremble. My name's Isabella, and what I'm about to tell you started when I was 24, back on my family farm tucked in the deep hills of western Pennsylvania. We were way out there, nearest neighbor over 2 miles away, forests pressing in on 3 sides. After finishing my degree in agricultural science, I'd moved home to help my mom run the farm. My dad had passed the winter before, and she needed someone to handle the chores. The farm was 80 acres, mostly pasture for cattle, with dense woods that felt like they held their own secrets. It should have been peaceful, but that peace shattered in late September. The mornings had that crisp edge to them when I was walking the eastern pasture, checking fences, and I noticed the ground near the tree line looked weird. The dirt was ripped up, deep gouges like claws had shredded the soil, but far too big for any animal I knew. I've lived here my whole life. I know bear tracks, coyote prints, even the root marks left by wild boar. But these were massive, 6 inches across at least, dug into the dirt like the earth itself had been clawed. I snapped pictures and sent them to a buddy at the Pennsylvania Game Commission, thinking maybe a bear with some deformity had wandered in. His response was slower than usual. When he finally got back to me, he didn't give answers, just vague warnings. Stay clear of the woods. Call him if I saw anything else. That didn't sit right. He was usually straightforward. This felt off, like he knew something he wasn't ready to put into words. A week later, horror hit. One of our heifers, a young Angus named Betsy, was gone. Not gone quietly. She was torn apart. Her throat ripped, ribcage pried open, organs missing. Blood soaked the earth, and those same massive claw marks led back toward the forest. I called my friend at the commission again, and this time he came out himself. He walked the scene, circled Betsy, took pictures, studied the marks for over an hour. When he finally spoke, he told me to keep the other cattle near the barn at night, install motion sensor lights, and get a firearm if I didn't already own one. When I asked what could do this, he just shook his head. Reports had been coming in from neighboring counties, he said. Something was moving through the region, leaving destruction behind. That stuck with me. This wasn't an isolated incident. I followed his advice to the letter. Cattle moved closer, floodlights installed. Grandfather's old Remington 870 dug out of the basement. I cleaned it, loaded it, and kept it beside my bed every night. Mom thought I was overreacting. She didn't see the torn body of Betsy, the violence of it. Weeks passed with relative quiet. The cattle were jumpy, skittish, but no more killings. I dared to think maybe it had moved on. Then October hit. It was a Thursday just after midnight. I was asleep when the cattle started bellowing. Not their usual low, restless moos. This was terror, panic, the sound of death coming. Heart hammering, I grabbed the shotgun and bolted outside in pajamas and boots. The motion sensor lights lit up the barn, harsh and blinding. The cattle pressed against the far fence, wide-eyed, steam rising from their nostrils in the cold night. And then I saw it. At the edge of the light, where it faded into shadow, something stood. Massive, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, hunched slightly forward. Arms hung past its knees. Its body was coated in dark, matted fur. Its eyes reflected the floodlights in an amber glow that burned through the cold. We froze, staring at each other. My breathing ragged, shallow. The cattle frantic behind me. Then it moved, not straight at me but sideways, circling, staying just at the edge of the light. Fluid, predatory, unlike any bear or known animal. I raised the shotgun, hands trembling, shouted incoherently. The creature paused, tilted its head as if assessing me, then vanished. Just gone. In seconds, swallowed by the forest. I stayed put for what felt like forever, shotgun ready, expecting it to reappear. It never did. Morning brought fresh tracks. Huge. Almost human, but elongated, over 18 inches, pressed deep in the mud near the fence line. I photographed, measured, even made plaster casts. Sent them to my friend at the Game Commission. This time, he answered fast. Bigfoot. The word sounded absurd, but I was desperate. Within 2 days, a researcher named Alan drove out. He examined the tracks, claw marks, Betsy's kill site. Set up trail cameras, audio recorders near the pastures. He said it was probably a territorial male. Cattle killings happen where food is scarce, he explained. That it had shown itself to me was rare. Most times, these creatures avoid humans entirely. It had circled me to test my response or mark territory. Either way, he said, it was not a good sign. For the next month, I lived on edge. Shotgun by my side at night, trail cameras checked obsessively, morning walks of the property for any signs. Cameras picked up movement, shadows in the trees. Audio recorded guttural, deep growls echoing through the hills, sounds unlike any wildlife I knew. Then, in early November, it killed again. A full-grown bull, over 1,000 pounds, was found in the same northwest pasture. Throat torn out, chest cavity exposed. The violence unmistakable. Whatever this thing was, it had strength beyond comprehension. Alan returned with 2 other researchers. Hair samples on barbed wire, more tracks, recordings of vocalizations. But clear footage? Never. Winter came and the killings stopped. Alan suggested the creature either moved territory or hunkered down for the cold. I sold half the cattle that winter, couldn't risk more losses. The fear wasn't just financial, it was primal, gut deep. 3 years later, it hasn't returned. At least, I haven't seen it. But tracks appear occasionally. Shadows flicker past the trail cameras. I keep the shotgun loaded, lights on. Never approach the woods after dark. Locals think I'm paranoid. They don't know what it's like to look into those amber eyes, to feel that raw, primal fear staring back at you. Spring came, and with it, a false sense of relief. I kept the remaining cattle closer, still checked the cameras daily, still walked the property like a nervous sentry. Nothing appeared at first. I thought maybe it was done. That I'd been lucky, or unlucky enough to witness only a fragment of its reign. Then, on a foggy April night, I heard it. Not a growl or a scream, but a low, rolling hum, deep and guttural, vibrating through the soil beneath my feet. It wasn't close enough to see, but it was close enough to make the hairs on my arms stand on end. I froze. The cattle were silent, unnervingly still. My stomach clenched. Whatever it was, it knew I was awake. Over the next few weeks, the encounters grew bolder. Trail cameras caught enormous silhouettes moving just beyond the tree line. Shadows leapt across the pasture, far too large and fast for deer. The creature wasn't killing this time, not yet, but it was watching, learning, assessing. One night, I was out by the barn checking the locks when I heard a branch snap behind me. My heart slammed in my chest. I turned slowly. Nothing. Just the fog rolling through the pasture, but the air felt charged, electric. I could feel eyes on me. I've never been so acutely aware of every sound, every movement. Then, one afternoon, I found it. Not the full creature, just evidence it had been near the house. Tracks pressed deep into the muddy ground, claw marks on the porch steps, a broken branch leaning against the barn door like a warning. I wanted to run inside, slam the door, and lock every window, but I couldn't look away. Something about those marks, those traces, demanded acknowledgement. By mid-May, I realized this wasn't just about livestock. It had marked territory. I could feel it watching, moving in patterns, tracing the boundaries of my land. The night noises grew louder, more intentional. Roars, screams, even vocalizations that sounded almost like laughter. I would sit in the kitchen late at night, shotgun across my lap, waiting for the sun, knowing full well it was out there somewhere, stalking the dark. Then, in June, the first true encounter since that night with Betsy. I was out in the northwest pasture, doing morning checks, when I spotted movement at the tree line. It was crouched, hunched, observing me. I froze. My gun hand instinctively went to the shotgun, but I didn't move. I didn't dare. It stepped forward slightly, sniffed the air, its amber eyes locking onto mine. For a terrifying moment, I felt like I wasn't standing in my own pasture. I was trespassing in its world. It didn't charge, didn't attack. It just watched. Then, like a phantom, it melted back into the forest, leaving me trembling in the dew-soaked grass. I realized it wasn't just a predator. It was smart, methodical, calculating. It wasn't hunting me for food. It was studying, gauging my responses, deciding where it fit into this landscape. Summer passed, tension gnawing at my nerves. The cattle were safe, but I could feel the invisible leash of its presence. Every rustle, every shadow made me jump. I stopped walking near the woods at dusk. Every trip to the barn felt like threading a needle blindfolded, hoping nothing was lurking just beyond the light. Then August came, and with it, the chilling sound of predation again. One of the younger heifers, left a little farther from the barn because of a fence repair, was found dead. Not a full attack like Betsy or the bull, but partially mauled. Marks on her body indicated strength, intelligence, and cruelty. Whoever or whatever was out there, it had evolved, adapted. It had learned from the past months. By then, Alan and the research team were making regular visits. They collected hair samples, footprints, audio. They speculated about Bigfoot, a territorial male, possibly protecting young or asserting dominance. They documented, measured, analyzed, but the creature never revealed itself fully. Always the shadows, the tracks, the guttural echoes, always just beyond reach. Fall rolled around again. I was a year in now, living in constant vigilance. Sleep was minimal. Every night I would sit on the porch after sunset, shotgun on my lap, lights on, listening for the low hum, the snap of twigs, the rustle of leaves. I caught glimpses, enormous shapes moving in the distance, tall, agile, impossibly fast. One night, the encounter became terrifyingly close. I stepped outside to check the perimeter after a particularly eerie chorus of calls from the woods. Fog hung low. I caught a movement, and before I could react, it was on the hill above the pasture, towering in silhouette, eyes glowing amber. Its roar was deafening, primal, shaking the very ground I stood on. I froze, paralyzed by fear and awe. It tilted its head, observed me, and then, almost casually, it leapt back into the trees and vanished. I collapsed to my knees, breathing hard, shotgun clutched to my chest. Since that night, the encounters slowed. Perhaps it moved on temporarily, or maybe it had learned I was aware and prepared. Tracks appear occasionally, claw marks on old trees, shadows too fast and large to belong to known wildlife. I keep the lights blazing, the shotgun loaded, and I never step near the forest after dark. Neighbors think I've gone overboard, that isolation has twisted my mind. But they haven't seen the amber glow in the darkness, felt the cold dread of being watched by something that moves like smoke and hunts like a predator from nightmares. Alan checks in. Reports sightings across Pennsylvania are rising. Creatures like this, he says, are getting bolder, more frequent. My encounter, the aggression I witnessed, it was unusual, a significant event. It could have been protecting territory or young. I don't know what it truly was. Bigfoot? Some unknown predator? Something older, stranger? I only know it existed. It killed my cattle. It watched me. It disappeared without a trace. And somewhere out there, in the dense western Pennsylvania forests, it waits. If you live near remote woods, if you have livestock, pay attention. Tracks that seem wrong, noises that make your hair stand, animals acting terrified. Don't shrug them off. Bears and coyotes are predictable. This is not. This hunts smarter. It waits. And if you ever lock eyes with it, you'll understand the cold, ancient terror that lies in the hills. The woods keep their secrets, and some of those secrets are far more monstrous than we dare imagine. I need to start by saying, this story still sends shivers down my spine, even though it happened over a decade ago. Some memories are hazy, moments I can't fully explain, and an ending that defies any logical sense I've tried to force onto it. My name's Harry, and what I'm about to tell you took place in a tiny Pennsylvania town during the darkest stretch of my life. I got married at 21. We were just out of college, two kids thinking we had found our forever during sophomore year. Looking back, we were naive, playing house with no idea what marriage really demanded. It lasted barely 2 years before it collapsed. The divorce wasn't dramatic, no shouting matches or fiery courtroom scenes. It just dissolved. Slowly, suffocatingly, everything we built turned to dust. The worst part wasn't even the divorce itself. It was how it shattered me. My parents had gone through multiple divorces. I watched their relationships implode one after another growing up, and I swore I'd break the pattern. I'd find the right person, build something lasting, escape the family cycle. But I failed. I chose wrong. I couldn't fix it. Suddenly, I was just another failed story, another statistic, adding to the legacy I desperately tried to escape. A few months after the divorce was finalized, I moved into a cheap little rental on the edge of town. Isolated, run down, and exactly what I thought I needed. I wanted distance, space to sort through everything without nosy neighbors or pitying stares. The house was built sometime in the 50s, creaky floors, drafty windows, and a front yard swallowed by the surrounding woods. The nearest neighbor? Half a mile away. That solitude should have been comforting. Instead, it amplified everything. The silence pressed down like a weight. Every groan of the settling house, every floorboard that shifted, sounded like it was amplified tenfold. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying every mistake I made in my marriage. Sleep became a battlefield. When I did manage to fall asleep, restless, fragmented dreams left me waking exhausted. And then the nightmares began. At first, I blamed stress. Divorce messes with your head, disrupts sleep, dredges up all sorts of emotional baggage. But these weren't ordinary nightmares. They were identical every night, like a broken film looping endlessly in my mind. In the dream, I was always in the kitchen of that rental house. Nighttime, dark, except for pale moonlight filtering through the sink window. I'd be standing there, sometimes doing dishes, sometimes just staring into the blackness, when I'd hear it. The back door, the one leading to the small deck, would creak open slowly. And she would appear. A girl, not my ex-wife, but with vague echoes of her in my memory. She wore a long white dress, stained with mud and leaves, like she'd been trudging through the woods for hours. Her brown hair hung wet and tangled down her back, covering her shoulders. I never saw her face, not once. She'd stop under the attic stairs, the pull-down wooden ones that hung like an open jaw. She stood there, perfectly still, back to me. I'd try to speak, to ask her why she was there, what she wanted. My lips would move, words formed, but no sound came out. Then, after a pause that felt like an eternity, she screamed. Not a human scream, something primal, vibrating through my bones, making my teeth rattle. When she screamed, the house started to fall apart. Slowly, methodically. Walls cracked, floors buckled, ceilings splintered and rained down debris. I tried to run, but my legs refused. I'd stand frozen, watching the house crumble around me. And then I'd wake up, drenched in sweat, heart hammering, gasping for air. It happened again the next night, and the next. For nearly 3 months, almost every night, I was tormented by the same dream. Sleep became a form of torture. I started dreading bedtime, drinking just enough to pass out, hoping the booze would mute the nightmare. It never did. I've always been drawn to symbolism, to the ways our subconscious communicates through images. The faceless girl, the crumbling house, the terrifying silence followed by destruction. It was my mind processing the divorce, the collapse of the life I thought I'd built, the foundation turning to dust. Intellectually, I understood. Emotionally, it made no difference. My mind punished me every night, and I had no way to stop it. At some point, I stopped sleeping in the bedroom altogether. I can't even remember deciding it consciously, but the room felt wrong, contaminated by the nightmares. I camped out on the couch in the living room, leaving the TV on, letting the flickering light and background noise drown out the oppressive quiet. But even there, the dream followed me. No matter where I slept, she appeared, standing under the attic stairs, screaming, destroying everything. Until one night, something changed. It was a Tuesday, early December. I woke suddenly at exactly 2 a.m. I know the time because I checked my phone. There was a text from a friend about meeting up later that week. I replied. That detail matters because it proves I was awake, fully conscious, not dreaming, sitting on the couch in the dark. And then I heard it, a knock at the front door. Soft, deliberate. 3 slow taps. My blood ran ice cold. I lived at the end of a gravel road, miles from the next house. Nobody should have been there. I froze, phone in hand, listening. Another 3 taps. Slow, intentional. I forced myself toward the window beside the door, peeking just enough to see. No porch light, everything shrouded in shadow. And then I saw her. A figure on the porch, wearing a white hoodie, hood pulled up, hair spilling out. My heart nearly stopped. It was her, the girl from my dreams. Only this time, real. I opened the door a crack. Not enough for her to enter. She didn't move, just stood there, head bowed, hair hiding her face. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper. "Can I use your phone?" It was mundane, ordinary, a stranded traveler, someone in trouble. But instinct screamed at me. Against my better judgment, I handed her the phone. She brought it close to her face, the glow illuminating her features. Pressed a few buttons, held it to her ear, whispered, "Hey, I need your help." Pause. "Okay." Then handed it back. I looked at the screen. Dial pad. No number entered, no call made, nothing. I looked up. She was gone. Just gone. Not walking away. Gone. I locked every door, checked every window, sat on the couch with lights blazing until sunrise. I couldn't sleep. And then the strangest thing happened. After that night, the nightmare stopped completely. 3 months of unrelenting terror vanished the moment she appeared. I've never understood why. 2 months after that night, I came home from hanging out with friends to a scene that made my stomach twist. The house had been broken into. Drawers pulled out, cabinets emptied, electronics gone, anything of value vanished. It was like someone had swept through with a purpose, meticulous but violent in its own way. The police filed a report, but they never found the person responsible. I kept replaying the night of the girl on my porch over and over. Was she scouting my place? Was the whole phone thing just a ruse to see what I had? To confirm I lived alone? To decide whether I was worth robbing? That explanation made sense logically. It fit the facts. But it didn't explain the dream stopping. It didn't explain how she looked exactly like the figure that haunted my sleep for months. Sometimes I tell myself she was just a human, a thief, someone opportunistic. Other times, I can't shake the thought that she was something else entirely. Something that existed in the blurry space between sleep and wakefulness, between imagination and reality. Something that walked through my door and took the nightmare with her. I never saw her face in the dream, only her back, her tangled hair. When she appeared on the porch, the glow of the phone briefly gave her features, and maybe that was the first time she had a face at all. Maybe that's what broke the cycle. I don't know. I've spent years trying to rationalize it, looking for a scientific explanation. There isn't one. All I know is that for 3 months, I was tortured by a nightmare more vivid than anything else I've experienced. And then a girl, identical to that nightmare, showed up in real life, asked to use my phone, and vanished. I never dreamed of her again. Life didn't magically go back to normal. The sense of unease lingered, gnawed at the edges of my mind. I became hyper-aware of every creak in the house, every flicker of shadow. My friends noticed the change. My family noticed. I was jumpy, on edge, exhausted from months of disrupted sleep, and a lingering fear that something I couldn't see might be out there, watching. The following winter was brutal, not just because of the weather. The isolation, the silence, the echoes of those dreams weighed on me. I found myself checking locks obsessively, double-checking windows, peeking through curtains late at night. Every gust of wind, every distant howl of a dog, every snapping twig outside my yard felt like a warning. My imagination ran wild. Was it her? Something else? I couldn't tell anymore. I began to notice small things around the house, subtle disturbances that I couldn't fully explain. A drawer slightly ajar that I was certain I had shut. Footsteps echoing upstairs when I was alone in the living room. Shadows shifting just out of the corner of my eye. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my mind was projecting the terror of those months onto reality. And maybe I was. But maybe I wasn't. By spring, I started venturing out more, trying to reclaim some semblance of normal life. Friends invited me out. Work required me to engage with people, and I tried to put the nightmare and the girl behind me. But the memory lingered like a shadow in every corner. I could never fully escape the feeling that the line between reality and nightmare was thinner than I thought. Then came the small-town whispers. I heard stories from neighbors, casual mentions of odd sightings on gravel roads, of strange figures glimpsed through the woods, someone walking in the dead of night with no explanation. At first, I dismissed it as coincidence, the result of overactive imaginations. But the details, they mirrored my own experience in unsettling ways. People mentioned a girl, a woman, wandering in a white dress or hoodie, appearing and disappearing like a ghost. I never told anyone the full story. How could I? They'd think I was crazy. But inside, I felt a connection, like my nightmare wasn't entirely mine. Something had crossed over, had entered the world where dreams bleed into reality. And somewhere, out there, it waited, watched, observed. That year, I moved again. I couldn't stay in that house, couldn't stand the constant tension, the gnawing fear that the boundary between sleep and waking life had been breached. I found a small apartment closer to town. It was safer, mundane, predictable, but it couldn't erase what I had experienced. I kept thinking about the way she had asked for the phone, the way she had disappeared without a trace, the impossibility of the dream ending when she appeared. Months later, I started having odd sensations, fleeting glimpses, sounds that reminded me of her, a shadow across a parking lot, a silhouette moving in the corner of a window. Every time I convinced myself I was imagining it, it would reappear in another form, subtle but unmistakable. I learned to live with the unease. The fear had settled into a quiet, constant awareness, like a low hum under my skin. And then, just when I thought I might start moving on, life reminded me that some things never leave. One late night, I was walking home from a friend's place when I saw her, or someone like her, standing at the edge of the street, hood up, white dress faintly visible under the streetlight. I froze, heart hammering. The figure didn't move, didn't approach, just stood there, watching. Then, without a sound, it disappeared into the darkness. That night, I realized I would never fully understand what had happened. Whether she was human, supernatural, or something else entirely, I didn't know. I just knew the world had a lair I couldn't see, a place where nightmares could step into reality. And sometimes, they do. I've since learned to respect the thin boundaries between our minds and the world outside. If you ever find yourself plagued by recurring dreams, if your subconscious torments you with figures, shadows, or screams you cannot control, be careful. Be mindful of what you invite in. Because sometimes the things that haunt us in sleep can find a way into waking life, and when that line blurs, there's no turning back. The girl never came back to my apartment. I never had the dream again. But I carry her memory, her silence, her scream, everywhere I go. Every creak in a floorboard, every flicker of shadow, every inexplicable noise reminds me that the impossible can exist just beyond our perception. And that line, the one separating dream from reality, is far thinner than we're willing to admit. I need to be straight with you before I dive in. I don't buy into ghost stories, hauntings, or any of that paranormal nonsense. Never have. I've always trusted logic, science, proof. But what went down in that old farmhouse in Pennsylvania shook all that to its core. My name's Poppy, and I'm going to tell you why I will never set foot in that house again, even though it's technically mine. This all happened 7 years ago. I was 26, working as a nurse at a small regional hospital, and finally looking to buy my first home. Pennsylvania's rural areas can be dirt cheap if you're willing to tackle a fixer-upper. I spent months scrolling listings when I stumbled across a foreclosure that seemed almost unreal. A 3-bedroom farmstead on 5 acres, listed for less than 40 grand. The photos showed a house that looked worn but sturdy, original hardwood floors, a stone fireplace that dominated the living room. Sure, it needed work, but nothing that seemed impossible. I got in touch with the agent, a woman named Linda, who specialized in foreclosures and estate sales. She hesitated when I mentioned the property, said it had been on the market for over 2 years. Buyers kept pulling out before closing. When I pressed for specifics, she gave vague excuses about inspection snags and financing issues. Red flags? Yeah. But the price was too good to pass up. We set up a walkthrough on a Saturday in early October. The house sat 15 miles outside a town called Edmonton, down a narrow dirt road snaking through thick woods. The property itself was surrounded on 3 sides by forest, and behind it lay an overgrown field. As we drove up, I remember thinking it looked abandoned, sad, like it had been waiting for someone to care. Linda unlocked the door and we stepped inside. The air hit me first, stale, cold, that mix of dust and decay, and something else I couldn't name. The house was empty, stripped of furniture, but the bones were impressive. High ceilings, exposed beams, the stone fireplace dominating the living room. I walked through, taking mental notes on repairs and costs. Everything seemed manageable, until we hit the second floor. 3 bedrooms upstairs, all empty but one. The middle room had a door that was slightly ajar. When I pushed it open, a blast of cold air hit me. Noticeably colder than the rest of the house, enough that my breath fogged. Linda noticed too and muttered something about insulation, suggesting we move on quickly. But curiosity got the better of me. I stepped inside. The walls were lined with faded floral wallpaper, peeling in places. The floor groaned under my weight. Then I saw it. The closet door, nailed shut. Not locked, nailed. At least a dozen long nails driven straight through the frame. I asked Linda, and she shrugged. No idea. She'd never seen the inside herself and had no inventory on the property. I should have walked away. But I didn't. I made an offer, and within 2 days the bank accepted. 3 weeks later, I was the owner of a house I'd only seen once. Moving in came on a freezing November morning. I'd hired a contractor for major repairs like plumbing and roof work, but planned to handle the cosmetic stuff myself. I stripped old wallpaper, sanded floors, painted walls. Exhausting work, but satisfying. For a few weeks, life seemed normal. But I kept avoiding that second-floor room, the middle bedroom. Something about it felt wrong, heavy in my chest, a hesitation I couldn't explain. About a month in, I finally forced myself upstairs. Crowbar in hand, I started prying the nails out of the closet door. Took over an hour. Whoever did this wanted the door closed, sealed. When I finally pulled it open, I understood why. It wasn't a closet. Behind it was a tiny hidden room, maybe 6 by 8 feet. No windows, walls covered in old newspapers. And in the center, objects that made my blood freeze. A small wooden table loaded with jars of unidentifiable liquids, some clear, some dark, thick. Bundles of dried herbs tied with black string. Animal bones arranged in geometric patterns. A leather-bound journal, pages filled with handwriting I couldn't decipher. And photos. Old black and white images of people I didn't know, staring straight at the camera, faces ranging from terrified to resigned. I backed out immediately. Didn't touch anything, didn't photograph. Just shut the door, went downstairs, sat on the porch, trying to make sense of it. Every instinct screamed to call someone. Police, previous owner, anyone. But the house was foreclosed, the previous owner gone. There was no one to ask. That night, I heard the footsteps. First time. I was lying in bed, telling myself it was just the remnants of some bizarre hobby. Nothing sinister. Then I heard them. Slow, deliberate steps moving through the house. Started in the living room, crossed the kitchen, hallway, then up the stairs. I froze as they paused outside my bedroom. Shadows of feet slipped beneath the door. Then, they moved down the hall, stopping at the middle bedroom. I didn't sleep. Sat with every light on, listening. They didn't come back until the next night. Morning offered false comfort. Just the house settling, I told myself. But the pattern repeated, night after night. Downstairs, across the house, up the stairs, pause at my door, then to that middle room. I started digging into the house's history. County records revealed 11 owners over 40 years. Most stayed only a year or two before selling or abandoning it. 3 died living there, 1 heart attack, 1 suicide, 1 mysterious. The foreclosure I bought came after the previous owner fled without explanation. A local historian, Mr. Brennan, confirmed what I feared. The house had a dark reputation. Stories of strange events, unexplained deaths going back decades. In the early 1900s, the property had belonged to a woman practicing folk magic and herbalism, viewed with suspicion. She died mysteriously, and locals considered the property cursed ever since. I don't believe in curses, still don't, but I couldn't deny what was happening. Footsteps every night, objects moving, closed doors found open. That middle bedroom grew icy, even on warm days, frost forming on windows. And the basement? I avoided it. The contractor said it was structurally fine, damp, needed a sump pump. One sleepless evening, I grabbed a flashlight and went down. Old wooden stairs groaned. Bare stone walls, dirt floor. In a far corner, another door. This one closed, not nailed. Behind it, a narrow passage, maybe a root cellar or storage. Inside, more jars, more bones, and something else. A large circle drawn on the dirt, symbols etched around it with ash or charcoal. I left and never went back. I called a local priest to bless the house. He spent an hour, praying, sprinkling holy water. He said he felt a presence, something refusing to leave. He advised selling. Some places carry darkness that can't be cleansed. 6 months later, I couldn't handle it. No sleep, no peace. I moved out, rented an apartment. Tried selling the house. Every potential buyer backed out. Some wouldn't even step on the second floor. Others felt instantly ill, uneasy. The house remains empty. I still own it. And sometimes, driving past, I swear I see lights in the second floor windows, shadows moving behind them. I know, without a doubt, that whatever lingers there is still inside, still walking those steps every night. Some places are wrong. Some darkness seeps into the walls and refuses to leave. That house, on that isolated dirt road, is one of them. After I moved out, I tried to convince myself I had escaped it. But the truth is, leaving didn't erase what had touched me there. I started having vivid dreams, flashes of the house, the middle bedroom, the shadows moving across the walls. At first, I thought I was just anxious, traumatized. But it didn't feel like fear from memory. It felt alive, like the house was reaching out, reminding me it still existed. I checked in with neighbors occasionally. The road was long and quiet, lined with trees that bent under wind and shadow. The locals didn't talk much about the house, and when I pressed, they shrugged or changed the subject. Some even avoided the dirt road entirely at night. One elderly man whispered once about things that don't die, staring at me like I already knew the truth. That glance alone made my skin crawl. 2 months after moving out, I came home late one night from a shift. The sky was black, the wind carrying the scent of wet leaves. And I saw something I still can't explain. The house, my house, had a single light flickering on the second floor. There was no power connected. I stopped my car, frozen, my heart hammering. Shadows moved behind the curtains. They shifted in ways no normal body could. And then, a door creaked open. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn and run, but my legs froze in place. I watched from the edge of the gravel road as the shadow in the window seemed to glance toward me. Not angrily, not even curiously, just aware. And then it disappeared, as if pulled back into the house. That night, I couldn't sleep. My apartment felt safer, but even there, I felt it watching, lying in wait. Weeks passed, and the house seemed to hum with quiet activity. Neighbors reported strange sounds. Footsteps late at night, doors slamming, lights turning on and off with no explanation. A friend dared to peek inside once when I reluctantly let him drive me by. He never spoke of what he saw, but the pale white ashen look on his face said enough. He refused to go inside again. I began to research the house more thoroughly. Old newspaper archives, local legends, court records. It had changed hands countless times. Some owners disappeared entirely for months, then reappeared, broken and silent. One had been institutionalized for nervous collapse after living there for less than a year. Another vanished without a trace. Every story led to the same word: darkness. The house carried something, some lingering malevolent energy that no one could explain. I even hired a paranormal investigator once. Mainstream, licensed, skeptical. But they came back pale, speechless. Equipment malfunctioned, cameras shorted out. And the one time the EMF meter spiked, the investigators said it was off the charts, off any scale we've ever measured. They left hours later, refusing to go back. I paid them anyway. I couldn't bring myself to enter. But it wasn't just reports or equipment. Objects in my apartment began to move. A book I left on my desk would end up on the floor. My keys would vanish for hours before reappearing in odd places. Even the air itself felt thick at times, like the house was breathing, waiting for me to return. And every so often, I would hear the faintest creak of footsteps, just at the edge of hearing, far too rhythmic to be my imagination. I finally realized something I had ignored before. The middle bedroom wasn't just a room. It was a doorway, a threshold. The symbols, the objects, the arrangements, it all pointed to something meant to hold, contain, or summon. I couldn't understand it fully, and I didn't want to. But every experience after moving out confirmed it. Whatever had lived there wasn't gone. One cold January night, I received a text from a neighbor I barely knew. "Lights are moving upstairs again," it read. I had to see. Against my better judgment, I drove the 15 miles. The house loomed in the dark like a blackened tooth. I parked at the edge of the road. The second-floor window glowed faintly. I saw movement, shadows twisting unnaturally, sliding across walls. Then the light flickered, and the curtains pulled back, as if someone, or something, was looking straight at me. I stayed until the sun started to rise, watching, shaking. I left without setting foot inside, and from that moment on, I swore never to enter again. Not for repairs, not for curiosity, not even to sell it. Because I realized something terrifying. The house wasn't abandoned. It had life. Not human life, but presence, awareness, malice. It waited, patient, quiet, letting the world forget it until it needed attention again. Even now, I see people drive past the property. Some slow down, curious about the old farmhouse. I want to warn them, to scream at them to turn back. But most would dismiss it. Nobody sees what I saw. Nobody feels the weight pressing from inside those walls. Nobody hears the footsteps that never end. And I've learned, there's no reasoning with it. There's no logic. Some places are wrong. They aren't cursed in the fairy tale sense. They are fundamentally corrupted, alive in a way that can't be explained. I've had other houses since then. Normal, quiet, safe. But nothing has erased the knowledge of that place. Nothing has quieted the echo of footsteps, the ice-cold chill of that bedroom, the feeling of being watched, calculated, studied. I'll never sell it. I'll never set foot inside again. And yet, every now and then, I check the road, glance at the windows, and I know it's still there, waiting, always waiting. The hardest lesson I've learned from that house is simple. Just because you can enter somewhere doesn't mean you should. Just because something looks like an opportunity, a bargain, doesn't mean it's safe. Some doors are closed for a reason. Some walls are sealed. Some spaces hidden. Because what's inside isn't meant to walk among us. And when you cross that line, even slightly, you risk inviting something that will follow you for the rest of your life. So if you ever find a house in the woods, abandoned, cheap, looking like it's just waiting for someone to care again, heed the warning. Don't ignore the nails in a door. Don't push open the room that feels wrong. Some places don't forgive curiosity, and some presences never leave. I've learned to live with it, to drive past, never look too long, never speak of it in detail. But I know it's out there, still moving, still aware, still pacing the hallways, tracing the middle bedroom, counting the nights until someone else crosses the threshold. And I know with absolute certainty that the darkness I felt, the weight I carried, the footsteps I heard, they were real, not imagined, not in my head. Real. And it will always be there, just waiting for the next curious soul to knock on its door. I moved to Minersville, Schuylkill County, hoping to escape the grind. I was 32, drained from years drowning in corporate finance in Philly, and craving a slower, quieter life. The town looked perfect. Barely 4,000 people, streets lined with old Victorian homes, and that cozy small-town vibe where everyone supposedly knew everyone. My name's Arthur, and the truth about Elm Street would shatter every illusion I had about safe neighborhoods. I found a modest 2-story rental on the east side of town. Affordable, walkable to the main street, and tucked in a quiet stretch the landlord swore was peaceful. He said most of the neighbors were elderly and kept to themselves, ideal for someone like me trying to shake off city chaos. I moved in on a warm June Saturday. Within the first week, I met my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski. She was in her late 70s, maybe early 80s, tiny, silver hair always in a tight bun, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to pierce right through you. Her Victorian house was pristine, lace curtains in every window, a garden overflowing with roses she tended like sacred treasures. The day after I moved in, she knocked with a plate of homemade pierogi and welcomed me warmly. I felt instant relief. The neighborhood suddenly seemed safe and inviting. Over the next few weeks, we became friendly. She waved from her garden as I left for work, occasionally asked for help carrying groceries, and we'd chat about weather, town news, or nothing at all. She felt like the quintessential sweet old neighbor, the comforting symbol of small-town life. At least, that's what I thought. The first weird thing I noticed was her visitors. People showed up at her house at the oddest hours, always late at night, usually between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. I'm a light sleeper, and car doors slamming woke me instantly. I peeked out the bedroom window, watching cars pull into her driveway. Varying vehicles, vans, sedans, but always headlights off. People went inside, stayed 20 to 30 minutes, then left. It happened multiple nights a week, and it seemed off for a woman her age. I asked her casually one morning while she watered roses. I joked about the noise, gauging her reaction. She smiled and said it was just friends from church, working late shifts, checking in. It sounded plausible, so I let it go. After all, why suspect an old lady of anything sinister? But then things got stranger. One July night, around 1 a.m., I got up for water. My kitchen window faced her side yard. I froze at the sink. 2 men were hauling something from her back door to a van parked in the alley. Wrapped in heavy fabric, bulky and long, like a rolled-up rug. They loaded it silently, drove off without headlights until the street. A cold knot of unease settled in my gut. Something about the urgency, the secrecy. It didn't sit right. I tried rationalizing it. Maybe old furniture, maybe cleaning out storage. But why at night? Why in darkness? I began tracking the cars, recording plates, noting times, people, vehicles. Mostly men, ages varying, always carrying something, bags, boxes, or those same heavy wrapped bundles. And there was a smell. Metallic, acrid, chemical. Faint but unmistakable, strongest at night during their visits. One August night, around 10 p.m., I was taking out trash. Voices came from her backyard. Curiosity got me. I peeked around my house. Her back door was open, basement lights on. I heard at least 3 voices talking in hushed, urgent tones. Then, crying. Soft, muffled, coming from below ground. Young, frightened. Not her. My blood ran cold. I backed away quietly, locked my doors, and sat in the dark living room, heart hammering. I tried to rationalize it, maybe visiting grandchildren, innocent crying. But combined with the late-night visitors, the wrapped bundles, and the odor, it painted a darker picture. I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., a van pulled up. 2 men went inside, 15 minutes later left with a canvas-wrapped bundle. That was it. I knew. Those weren't pieces of furniture. I called the police the next morning. Explained the suspicious behavior, late-night comings, the smell, the crying. The first officer took notes, said they'd patrol the area more. 2 days later, another officer came, grilled me on times, vehicle types, plates, people descriptions. He didn't say what was going on, but his focus made clear. This was serious. He told me to stay inside at night and call immediately if I saw anything unusual. For a week, I barely slept. The visitors didn't stop. I documented everything carefully, photographing vehicles, recording times, staying hidden. I feared she'd notice or discover my calls to the cops. Then one night, it escalated. It was a Thursday, just past midnight. A vehicle pulled into her driveway. But this time, it wasn't a regular van. It was a police van, flanked by 3 unmarked cars. I watched from my dark bedroom as officers swarmed her house, knocking loudly, then barging in. Flashlights danced through windows, muffled shouting echoed down the street. Minutes later, they brought people out. Young women, 5 or 6, wrapped in blankets, led to ambulances that had appeared silently, without sirens. Mrs. Kowalski was handcuffed, placed in a police car. Tiny, frail, nothing like the monster she truly was. Federal agents scoured her home, hauling boxes of evidence, computers, and documents. Crime scene tape sealed the property. For days, news vans and law enforcement filled the street. The investigation revealed the full horror. Mrs. Kowalski had been running a human trafficking operation for her basement for over a decade. Connected to a multi-state network, she used her sweet old lady persona to avoid suspicion. The basement had been converted into holding cells, crude, secure spaces where victims were kept before being moved. The crying I'd heard? Real. The bundles carried away? Drugged victims. Authorities discovered some locals had suspected or known but stayed silent, either from fear or complicity. Late-night visitors were buyers, enforcers, and traffickers moving victims through the network. Mrs. Kowalski, with her pierogi and rose garden, was the centerpiece. I testified at her trial. She showed zero remorse, sitting calmly, like attending a church social instead of facing life imprisonment. Convicted on multiple charges, human trafficking, kidnapping, conspiracy, she would die in prison. I left Minersville within a month. I couldn't stay, couldn't pass that house daily, knowing what happened inside. The town itself felt tainted, corrupted by the realization that such evil thrived in plain sight. Residents avoid discussing it. They want to forget, to move on. But it wasn't isolated. Investigations revealed links to other towns, other trafficking operations, part of a larger web. I still have nightmares. I dream of the basement crying, my body frozen, doing nothing while terrified voices call out. I wake drenched in sweat, heart racing, haunted by the thought that if I hadn't called police, those victims might still be trapped. If you ever see something suspicious, act. Don't dismiss instincts because someone seems harmless. Evil doesn't always wear a mask of rage. It often hides in plain sight. Sometimes it's a sweet elderly neighbor with a rose garden. Sometimes it's right next door, and only someone paying attention can stop it. Human trafficking still exists, in small towns, across the country. Hidden behind closed doors, in places you'd never suspect. Stay alert, trust your gut, and never ignore that nagging feeling that something is deeply, horribly wrong. My name's Daisy, and this nightmare kicked off on a regular August evening back in 1987. Nothing about what came after was normal, though. I had just hit 17, the youngest kid in a family of 4, living on a quiet farm in Birdsong, a tiny village tucked on the edge of Lancaster County's endless cornfields and winding creeks. Summers there were sticky and thick, the air alive with buzzing insects and the smell of overgrown grass. By night, the roads were nothing but black stretches lined with twisting hedges. I grew up thinking life was simple. Morning chores, schoolwork on the porch, dinners at the old oak table, and long walks behind the fields. Our farmhouse was tucked back from the road, shaded by old maples and gnarled oaks, the kind of house that had survived decades of rain, snow, and frost. Dad ran a small herd of cattle and worked evenings as the local mechanic. Mom tended a garden and baked bread every Friday. Life felt steady, predictable. Nothing dangerous had ever crossed our threshold. That evening, I had just helped Mom finish the sweet corn harvest. The air was heavy with the last heat of summer, and far-off thunder rumbled like a warning. My brother and I wandered across the fields, tossing stories back and forth as fireflies hovered near the hay bales by the creek. After sunset, he went inside for a glass of lemonade, leaving me to stretch my legs and watch the sky. Clouds drifted fast, stars peeking through gaps, fleeting like whispers. I knelt down to tie my boots near the tree line bordering the neighbor's property. That last patch of twilight I'd see that night. That's the last memory I can claim as my own. Kneeling in the blue shadows of the grass, listening to insects and frogs calling to the night. Everything after that is pieced together from what others told me, or what I've reconstructed in the hollow silence of my own survival. According to my family, it took 10 minutes before anyone realized I'd vanished. My brother glanced back, expecting me to be just behind him. When he didn't see me, he asked Dad, who shook his head. Mom ran out onto the porch, her voice slicing through the fields as she called my name. When I didn't answer, Dad grabbed a flashlight and started searching. His boots thumped through the rows of beans and squash, calling louder each time his voice failed to draw me back. Within 30 minutes, neighbors and law enforcement swarmed the farm. Cars lined the long driveway, lanterns and radios casting harsh, unnatural glows across the kitchen windows. Men moved through the corn in systematic lines, calling my name, shining lights into every gully and hollow. That night blurred into morning, but I never returned. All they found were my boots, standing upright near the tree line, as if I'd stepped out of them and walked barefoot into the woods. No footprints, no broken twigs, no marks on the grass, just my boots. The official search kicked off the next day. Lancaster County is full of folks tied to the land, Amish and Mennonite families, and old farmers who endure losses with quiet strength. They came with horses, dogs, and determination, scouring fields, knocking on doors, dragging the creeks, and scanning ravines. Helicopters buzzed low over the patchwork terrain. My parents stationed themselves at the kitchen table, maps spread everywhere, phone lines ringing non-stop. Days crawled by, and the hope that I'd stumble out dirty and tired began to waver. News outlets ran blunt notices. Local teen missing. Flyers went up on power poles, in stores, along Route 340. My school photo stared back from every bulletin board. Our farmhouse turned into the operations center. Mom brewed coffee and packed sandwiches for strangers, while Dad organized volunteers, walking the field perimeters with lanterns swinging, asking neighbors questions, chasing leads that led nowhere. After a week with no trace, theories began to circulate. The sheriff suggested I might have run off after a fight with my brother, though no one recalled an argument. The news speculated about strangers, a possible abduction, even accidents in the creeks. Mom and Dad refused to accept any of it. They just wanted me back. Their grief settled over the house like a wet fog. Friends brought casseroles and pies, trying to fill the void with food, but the emptiness persisted. Even a psychic showed up from Philadelphia, promising to locate me with dowsing rods. She wandered the fields pointing at empty brush, vanishing as quickly as she arrived. The small town thrummed with whispers, rumors and old tales growing heavier with every retelling. Mom would sometimes hear an owl hoot at night and break down, convinced it was a bad omen, a message carried on the wind. Months passed. The search slowed. My parents forced themselves to return to daily life. My brother went back to school, Dad returned to work, and Mom tended the garden mechanically, refusing to touch my room or pack my things until answers emerged. But the horror didn't end when the search stalled. It deepened. The first oddity came months later in March. Mom and my brother both saw a pale orb hovering at dusk near the tree line where my boots had been found. It flickered with an unearthly glow before vanishing into the mist. Neighbors eventually noticed it too. It wasn't regular. It was always in that same spot, always fleeting. The light became a legend in our town. The white glow by Daisy's place, tied forever to the night I disappeared. Next came the voice. Some nights, just past midnight, Dad swore he heard me calling his name from outside the porch. The voice was unmistakably mine, calm, clear, almost casual. Dad would bolt outside with a flashlight, wake Mom and my brother, and find nothing. Just the fields, the wind, and the chirping crickets. Over months, even skeptics in our family began to shiver at the thought that something beyond the natural world lingered on our land. Finally, a symbol of the unexplainable appeared. On the anniversary of my disappearance, for 3 years straight, a single wildflower, a blue aster, would appear on the porch. Fresh, plucked from the untamed grasses near the willows, not from the garden. No note, no footprints, just a flower. Every morning, it sat in the center of the top step like a message left by something that refused to be forgotten. By the time I should have graduated high school, the case had gone cold. Flyers faded. Police stopped returning calls. Mom filled journals with every detail, every theory, every clue. She started reading accounts of other strange disappearances in rural Pennsylvania, searching for patterns. What she found was chilling. Similar cases of young people vanishing without trace, only to leave behind lights, voices, and inexplicable objects. The story of my disappearance merged with the folklore of the county. And as strange as it seems, that's where my tale lives. Not in court files or newspapers, but in the fields, in the lights, in the whispers, in the blue asters that bloom every August. Life didn't get easier after the blue asters appeared. If anything, the terror settled deeper into our land. Each year, on that same late summer night, the air would thicken, the shadows stretching long across the cornfields like fingers. Dad refused to step near the tree line alone. My brother still flinched at the whisper of the wind through the willows. Mom kept her journals closer, writing feverishly, almost as if her pen could wrest answers from the darkness itself. By the second year, other neighbors started noticing weird things. Cars would slow along the lane near our farm, drivers staring, then disappearing down the road as if they'd never been there. Sometimes, faint lights flickered between the trees, green or white, hovering just above the undergrowth. Dogs in the area would bark at nothing, hair on their backs bristling. Even local kids spoke in hushed tones, saying they'd seen a girl in white wandering the fields at dusk, silent and glowing, vanishing the moment anyone approached. Mom insisted these weren't coincidences. Every detail she recorded, lights, voices, the blue asters, formed a pattern. She believed the land itself remembered, that whatever took me hadn't left entirely, that it lingered, watching, leaving reminders that life was fragile and unknowable. I could see the strain in her eyes. She slept in fits, jerking awake at the faintest sound, muttering my name. Dad, once solid as the oak trees, grew quiet and tight-lipped, his hands always on some tool, some work, as if he could hammer the fear out of the house. By the third anniversary of my disappearance, something new happened. That night, Dad, unable to sleep, stepped onto the porch and saw movement along the edge of the willow grove. A faint glow shimmered there, the same haunting orb from previous years. And then, he swore he heard me speak. Not a whisper, not a call, but a full sentence, slow and deliberate. "Follow me." Panic ripped through him. He grabbed a lantern and moved toward the grove, Mom shouting from the porch, my brother stumbling behind him. But the light vanished before they reached it, leaving only the rustle of leaves and a cold wind that bit deep into their bones. Nothing was there. No tracks, no footprints, no signs that anyone had ever walked through the mist. The only evidence was the deepening unease that now sat in our chest like a stone. Years passed, but the phenomenon never stopped. Mom turned her focus into a research obsession. She contacted paranormal investigators, folklorists, even physics grad students who were curious about the unexplainable. Some came and camped near the willows with night vision cameras, thermal sensors, and recorders. Most left unnerved, unable to explain the sudden drops in temperature, the untraceable light, the faint, human-like voices that whispered and laughed in the night. One summer, a pair of graduate students, Mark and Lisa, set up an observation near the tree line. They recorded footage every night, capturing a faint, shifting light hovering just above the long grass. Sometimes the form seemed humanoid, small and slight, almost like a young girl in a glowing white dress. The light lasted exactly 3 to 4 minutes, then dissipated into the mist without a trace. Audio picked up strange sounds, laughing, soft sobbing, and whispers that rose and fell like wind through the corn. On their final night, Lisa saw something that chilled her. Through night vision, a glowing figure emerged from the trees. The outline was unmistakably human, tall enough to be a girl, flowing in a long white dress. She moved to the exact spot where my boots had been left years ago, paused, lifted one hand as if waving, and then vanished in a gust of cold wind. Mark reviewed their thermal footage and noted a drop in temperature, 7 degrees colder in that brief moment, as if the air itself had been drained of warmth. Despite the evidence, their work was dismissed by most of the academic community. No abnormal electromagnetic readings, no identifiable natural causes, no animal behavior to explain the phenomenon. It became one of those unsolvable mysteries, filed alongside ghost sightings, shadow people, and other rural legends. The Millers, the couple who had bought the farm after my parents moved away, tried to ignore it. They farmed the land for a few years, but livestock went missing, gates were left wide open, and tools vanished only to reappear in strange, impossible places. They eventually abandoned the property, unnerved by the creeping sense that something alive, something hungry, lingered there. As time passed, reports of strange disappearances spread across Lancaster County. Children and travelers vanished with no trace, always followed by similar patterns: mysterious lights, ghostly voices, and small objects left behind. Authorities chalked it up to accidents, runaways, or opportunistic crime. But locals knew better. They whispered of a shadow moving through the fields, claiming the careless, marking its presence in subtle, terrifying ways. Even now, my family keeps the story alive. Mom's journals are thick with accounts, every anniversary noted, every appearance of a blue aster documented. My brother, once dismissive, occasionally visits the farm to check for signs, although he never stays past dusk. I learned to live with the unknown, to accept that my disappearance didn't end in a clean resolution. It became part of the land, stitched into the hills, the creeks, and the long stretches of corn. Today, people still leave blue asters on the porch at sunset, hoping the light might appear, hoping they might see me, or whatever remains. Some don't believe in it, dismissing it as superstition. But for those who do, the land keeps secrets that cannot be boxed away. My boots still sit where they were found, a symbol, a warning, and a reminder. The whispers continue, the lights dance among the willows, and the air chills at night with a presence that refuses to be ignored. If you ever visit Birdsong, don't treat the stories lightly. Walk slowly through the fields, listen to the winds, and respect the places where shadows linger. Speak of the lost softly, and remember, some things vanish not because they are gone, but because they are waiting, watching, lingering in the space between fear and memory, between this world and whatever comes after. My name is Daisy. My boots remain. And every year, the blue asters bloom at the edge of the night, a reminder that some stories are never over. My name is Jacob, and I spent 12 years on the force in Hollingsworth, a tiny town tucked into the hills of northern Bradford County, Pennsylvania. People usually imagine small-town cops helping old folks across the street, breaking up rowdy teen parties, or writing tickets for speeders. Sure, that was part of the job. But small towns hide shadows far better than cities ever could. In a city, crimes are visible, documented, reported, public. In dying towns like Hollingsworth, the darkness buries itself deep, and anyone who knows keeps their mouth shut. I'm about to tell you why I walked away from law enforcement, and why I'll never go back. I joined the force at 22, fresh out of the academy, all fired up to do right. Hollingsworth had maybe 1,400 residents at the time, mostly old farmers, factory hands, and retirees whose kids had long since fled to bigger cities. The police department was tiny, 6 officers including the chief, and we handled everything from family fights to the occasional DUI. It was steady, boring work. For a while, I convinced myself I was helping, but then there was the quarry. About 3 miles out of town, down a gravel road snaking through dense forest, sat an abandoned pit that swallowed light. It had been active until the mid-1970s. Then the company folded and left the place to rot. The quarry itself was a yawning hole carved into the hillside, full of stagnant water so black it seemed bottomless. Locals claimed parts of it were over 100 feet deep. Around the edges, rusted machinery leaned at odd angles, collapsing shacks sagged against one another, and warning signs decayed into obscurity. Nobody obeyed them. Teenagers sneaked there to drink, swim, and dare each other. Every few years, someone disappeared, and the cops had to respond. Over decades, the quarry collected a number of deaths. Most were chalked up as accidents, kids diving into the black water and never resurfacing, bodies turning pale and bloated before we dragged them out. But some didn't fit. In 2003, A man named Tobias Kent was found at the bottom, hands bound behind his back. Authorities ruled it suicide. In 2007, a woman, Celia Voss, went hiking near the quarry and vanished. Her car was left at the entrance. Her body was never found. In 2011, a drifter was discovered near the edge with severe blunt trauma to the skull. The chief claimed he must have slipped. When I first joined, I trusted those rulings. Young, naive, I leaned on the judgment of older officers. Years went by, and patterns started emerging. Deaths at the quarry were closed fast, barely investigated. Autopsies were skipped or incomplete. Witnesses weren't properly questioned. Evidence wasn't logged. Anytime I asked questions, I was told to back off. "The cases are closed," they said. "Don't waste resources." It wasn't until 2019 that I started digging on my own. A local woman, Mrs. Halliday, came into the station one afternoon, pale and trembling. She wanted someone to hear her about her son. He had died at the quarry in 1998, officially an accidental drowning, but she never believed it. He was terrified of water and would never have gone swimming. That night, he'd told her he was meeting someone about a job. For 20 years, the department ignored her questions. I took her statement anyway, knowing I wasn't supposed to reopen decades-old cases without approval. I pulled her son's file. The investigation had been laughable. No witnesses, no follow-up on the job meeting, no toxicology. Just a note saying the body was recovered and death seemed accidental. Case closed in 48 hours. That was my first file. Over weeks, I reviewed every quarry death back to the 1980s. 17 victims in total, all ruled accidents or inconclusive, all closed with minimal effort. The more I read, the more wrong it felt. Patterns appeared if you looked closely. Hands bound, injuries inconsistent with drowning, witnesses never interviewed, evidence that vanished or was never logged. And one name kept popping up, Officer Dale Mercer, longtime second-in-command under the chief. I asked around town, carefully. Families of victims, old-timers who remembered when the quarry was active, they all whispered the same things. Dark rumors, smuggling operations in the 70s and 80s, drugs moving through the area, illegal gambling, even whispers of bodies dumped by organized crime figures from Scranton and Binghamton. Those who asked too many questions often ended up at the bottom of that pit. A former quarry worker, Eugene, warned me in no uncertain terms. He said the people tied to the quarry didn't leave when the mine closed. They adapted. He told me to stop digging, or I'd end up like the others. I should have listened. But I was too far in. I started documenting everything. Case files, interviews, photos of disturbed ground near the water, spots that looked like hasty graves. I contacted the state police, hoping for backup. Nothing. Then I reached a journalist in Harrisburg who specialized in corruption cases. She agreed to look into it. And that's when the warnings began. First, subtle. My patrol car vandalized, tires slashed. Then, anonymous late-night calls. Silence on the line, except for heavy breathing. My apartment was broken into while I worked. Files rifled through. Nothing stolen. A clear message. I was being watched. I confronted Mercer. His reaction? Cold. Flat. "Stop digging, Jacob," he said. "Some things in this town are bigger than you. Keep pushing and you'll end up at the bottom of that quarry like everyone else who didn't mind their business." When I went to the chief, expecting intervention, I was blindsided. He put me on administrative leave, demanded a psychological evaluation, took my badge and firearm. They called my concerns paranoid delusions. It was a clear message. Stop or die. I had two choices: let it go and keep my career, or continue and risk everything. I chose the latter. I gave the journalist every file, every photo, every interview. 2 days later, she died in a car accident on Route 6. Police said speed and weather. I knew better. I fled Hollingsworth that week, disappearing into Maryland, constantly looking over my shoulder, sure they'd come for me next. They never did, at least not directly. But I've never returned.
Some secrets in small towns are too dangerous to expose. Sometimes, surviving means walking away. The quarry in Hollingsworth still waits, still dark, still hiding what it has swallowed. And I live with the knowledge that I couldn't stop it, and that those responsible remain in power, burying their sins beneath cold, black water. I try not to think about it, but the quarry still haunts me. Every time I close my eyes, I see the water, black as oil, swallowing everything. Faces flash across my mind. Young, pale, lifeless, left behind by a town that pretends nothing exists. The families who begged for justice, ignored. The victims who were silenced. I left law enforcement, left Hollingsworth, but some shadows follow you, no matter how far you run. After Maryland, I moved to Westmore, a quiet spot in Virginia, and assumed a new name. I kept low, avoiding old contacts, keeping my life small and simple. I told no one my history. But peace was always temporary. Memories seeped in, triggered by any small hint of water, any abandoned structure, any whisper of injustice. Sometimes I woke in the middle of the night, hearing splashes in my dreams, or the faint echo of children calling my name. The mind is a cruel witness. It all came to a head one evening in 2021. I was walking along a river near my new home, trying to clear my head, when I noticed a figure across the water. At first, I thought it was a fisherman. But then it moved too smoothly, gliding rather than walking. It wore white. Pale skin reflected faint moonlight, eyes glinting like wet stones. My chest tightened. My stomach dropped. I froze, unable to move, unable to look away. The figure stopped at the riverbank, raised a hand, and for a moment I felt as if it was acknowledging me. A flicker of recognition, a warning, a reminder. Then it was gone. I ran, heart pounding, back to my apartment and locked every door. The nightmares that night were worse than usual. But I wasn't dreaming. Something had followed me from the past, something that never sleeps. I started checking the news obsessively. Hollingsworth, or nearby towns, never stopped producing disappearances. Teens vanishing near old forests, teenagers walking off trails, workers missing near abandoned mines or factories. And each time, the official story was the same: accident, runaways, misadventure. But families whispered, police files were mysteriously thin, and the pattern was unmistakable. The quarry wasn't the only place. It was everywhere the old crimes had been covered, forgotten, or ignored. In March of 2022, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside were photographs, black and white images of the quarry, the watered dark, disturbed earth along the edges. In one photo, a faint outline of a body half submerged, almost invisible. On the back, scribbled words in jagged handwriting. Some things cannot stay hidden forever. My hands shook. My pulse raced. Whoever sent it knew I was still alive, still watching, still remembering. By that summer, I realized something worse than the quarry itself haunted me: the silence of complicity. It's not just one killer or one corrupt officer. Entire systems protect the wrongdoers.
People look the other way because it's easier, safer. And when someone tries to speak, someone like me, threats follow. Car accidents, vandalism, intimidation. Fear is as much a weapon as a knife or a gun. I started documenting again, secretly. Every article, every death report, every rumor I could verify. I scanned public records, interviewed people cautiously. Some were willing to speak, most were not. But even the whispers painted the same grim picture, an institution that buries its own sins, a town with roots deep in blood and secrecy. In October, I returned, carefully, to Hollingsworth under the cover of night. I wanted to see the quarry one last time, even if only from a distance. The gravel road was silent. The forest loomed, shadows stretching long and black. When I reached the edge, the pit yawned before me like a mouth waiting to swallow everything again. I noticed movement on the water's surface. Not ripples from wind, not from animals. Something shifting beneath the blackness, almost alive. A chill ran up my spine. I remembered every victim, every injustice, every warning. And for the first time, I understood the full weight of the town's evil. The quarry wasn't just water and rock. It was a repository of secrets, a monument to greed, corruption, and silence. And it wasn't finished. It never would be. I backed away slowly, heart hammering, and left the forest. But the feeling followed me for days. The sense that eyes were watching, that I was not alone. Every shadow, every gust of wind, every dark corner carried the same message. Hollingsworth protects its own, and anyone who challenges it risks the same fate. By winter, I decided to disappear completely. I sold my belongings, moved to a city where no one knew me, and severed almost all ties. I didn't trust law enforcement, the press, or anyone with influence. Hollingsworth was a place where the rules didn't apply, and the law was just another layer of deception. Yet I still carry the quarry with me. The faces of the lost haunt my dreams. The water in my mind never stills. And I know that in the shadows of small towns across America, places like Hollingsworth exist, hiding horrors beneath polite smiles and quiet roads. Places where the powerful stay in power, and the victims are forgotten or erased. I sometimes wonder if the quarry will ever stop claiming people, if justice will ever reach them, or if its darkness, patient and eternal, will continue to swallow lives silently, unnoticed. And I wonder if one day the figure in white will find me again, not to warn, but to remind me that running only delays the inevitable. I cannot return. I cannot fight it openly. All I can do is remember, record, and warn those who stumble upon similar darkness. If you ever find yourself in a small town that feels off, where disappearances are dismissed, where fear keeps mouths shut, do not assume incompetence. Do not assume accidents. Sometimes the shadows are alive, fed by silence, secrecy, and power. The quarry in Hollingsworth still waits. Dark water, hidden graves, unanswered questions. And the people who protected it still walk free. I am alive, but only because I walked away. Only because I disappeared. And yet, every night, I hear the water in my dreams. I see the pale faces. I feel the hands of the lost brushing against my memory. Some stories are not meant to end. Some darkness never leaves. I am Jacob. I swore to protect. I failed. And I carry that failure with me, knowing the quarry holds truths the world will never see. Victims who will never rest, and a horror that continues, patient and eternal. And I live with the knowledge that sometimes survival is the only justice you can hope for, and that even then, the darkness never forgets. My name is Millie,
And I need to tell you about the church at the center of my family's past, and the darkness lurking below it. This takes place in a small town in Pennsylvania, though I won't name it. Not because of lawsuits or anything like that, but because some towns bury memories as deeply as they bury bodies. And some secrets are guarded by the people who profit from them. I grew up attending Sunday services at St. Lucian's Chapel, a grand stone church built back in 1887 by the town's founding families. It stood atop a hill overlooking Main Street, surrounded by twisted old oaks and a tiny graveyard where generations of townsfolk had been laid to rest. The church itself was breathtaking. Its stained glass windows glimmered in sunlight, showing biblical stories in reds and blues. The pews were dark wood, worn smooth, groaning under anyone's weight, and the massive pipe organ made the hymns echo as if the building itself was breathing. It felt timeless, like you were connected to something far bigger than yourself. My grandfather had been the pastor there for over 40 years. He died when I was 16. Quiet, deliberate, a man people leaned on when life got ugly. I remember sitting in his study while he drafted sermons, helping my grandmother set up church dinners, and running lines for the Christmas pageant. He seemed like pure goodness, the kind of man whose life was devoted to helping others. When he passed in 2015, my grandmother asked me to sort through his personal things. She was too fragile to handle it herself, and my parents were busy with work. I was 23 at the time, working as a teacher in a nearby city, so I took a week off to help. Most of what I found was ordinary: theology books, neatly written sermons, photos of church events spanning decades, letters from parishioners thanking him for guidance. But in the bottom drawer of his desk, under a pile of old hymnals, I found a leather-bound journal. It wasn't like his other notebooks. It was much older, leather cracked and brittle. And the handwriting wasn't my grandfather's. The pages dated back to the 1940s and 50s, and the author was someone named Reverend Callahan, who had been pastor before my grandfather took over in 1964. The entries were chilling. He wrote about gatherings in the church basement involving certain families in town, practices he called the old ways, animal sacrifices to ensure good crops, ceremonies timed with the moon. He described the basement as a conduit to forces older than Christianity. The writing was cautious, but the meaning unmistakable. Beneath this beautiful house of worship, something wicked had thrived. I should have stopped reading. I should have closed the journal and walked away. But I couldn't. The entries grew more specific, naming members of the congregation, prominent families still living in town, people whose children I had grown up with. Callahan described rituals passed down for generations, the church built on land deemed sacred by the town's founders, and the basement designed for dual purposes: prayers on the surface, darker rites below. One entry, October 1953, made my blood run cold. It told of a ritual gone wrong, an animal that hadn't died cleanly. Blood spilled across the stone floor in patterns he deemed sacred. Callahan wrote of burying the remains beneath the basement floor to sanctify the space and ensure future rituals succeeded. And then a line I will never forget. "The children don't understand what we do, but one day they will. This town is built on sacrifice, and sacrifice keeps it alive." I closed the journal, sitting in my grandfather's study, hands trembling. Had he known? Participated? Or found the journal and kept silent out of fear or guilt? I had no way to ask. My grandmother was too frail. My parents would never believe me. I decided I had to investigate on my own. Late one evening, I returned to the church with the key my grandmother still kept from my grandfather's time as pastor. The building was cold and dark, the only light filtering through the stained glass from street lamps outside. I headed to the basement.
The entrance was a narrow wooden door near the altar. The stairs were steep, groaning under each careful step.
The basement had mostly become storage. Boxes of Christmas decorations, broken pews, dusty hymnals. But in the far corner, partially hidden behind folding chairs, the floor looked different. Darker, stained, worn over decades. I moved the chairs aside. Symbols had been carved into the stone, faded but visible if you looked closely. When I pressed my hand against the floor, it was unnaturally cold, chilling through my skin, even though the rest of the basement felt stale and warm. I spent the next days digging through old town records, newspaper archives, and cemetery logs. My fears were confirmed. From the late 1800s into the early 1900s, the town had seen unexplained deaths, children vanishing, travelers disappearing, locals dying under strange circumstances. Many deaths coincided with dates Callahan had marked as important in his journal.
The founding families, I discovered, had immigrated from parts of Europe where folk magic and pre-Christian practices lingered long after Christianity arrived. They brought these beliefs with them, hiding them behind a polished facade of respectability, passing them down through generations. The most terrifying revelation came from Mrs. Brannigan, an elderly woman who had lived in town her whole life. After careful questioning, she admitted that in the 1940s she remembered her father and other men sneaking into the church at night. Children were told to stay inside and not ask questions. In the morning, a stench drifted down the hill, of burning meat and something unidentifiable. And after heavy rains, bones sometimes surfaced behind the church, near the cemetery. The town quietly reburied them, claiming the graves had shifted, but she always suspected otherwise. The families remained powerful, controlling the town, ensuring certain truths never surfaced. I confronted my grandmother with the journal. It was one of the hardest conversations of my life. She broke down, not in shock, but because she had prayed I'd never find out. She told me that my grandfather had discovered the journal soon after becoming pastor in 1964. He had confronted some of the older families, and they had threatened him. They said if he ever spoke of what he had found, they would ruin him, destroy his reputation, and make sure he'd never serve as pastor again. So he stayed silent. He hid the journal, stopped the rituals while he was in charge, but never revealed what had happened before. My grandmother begged me to leave it alone. She warned me that the families involved were still powerful and ruthless, and that pursuing the truth would put me in real danger. But I couldn't let it go. I reached out to a journalist from a larger city, someone known for digging into dark stories. I gave him copies of the journal pages, photos I'd taken in the basement, and everything I had uncovered. He was intrigued, even excited, and came to town to interview people, photograph the church, and inspect the basement. But within 2 weeks, he stopped returning my calls. When I finally reached him, he sounded scared. He said his editor had killed the story, deemed it not credible enough. He warned me to be careful, that people had been asking questions about me, and that I should drop it. I didn't. I went to the town council, demanding an excavation behind the church and an investigation of the basement. They refused, citing budget and lack of evidence. I went to the state police, but without physical proof of a crime, they said they couldn't open a case based solely on an old journal. It felt like shouting into a void. Then the harassment started. My car was vandalized, tires slashed, windows scratched. Threatening letters arrived in the mail, unsigned, simple. Leave town. Stop digging. Someone broke into my apartment and rifled through my things, though nothing was stolen. The message was clear: stop or pay the price. I left town. I moved back to the city, changed my phone number, tried to cut all ties to the place and its darkness.
but the knowledge haunts me. I know what lies beneath that church. I know that bodies are buried there, that rituals went on in that basement for decades, and that the founding families built their wealth and power on blood and sacrifice. The church is still there. Services continue every Sunday. The families still hold sway over the town. The basement, with its dark stains and carved symbols, remains untouched. Every year, after heavy rains, I hear from old friends that bones appear near the cemetery. And every year, the town quietly reburies them without investigation. I learned that these people will protect their secrets at any cost. Tradition and heritage are their cover. Questions are discouraged, and anyone who probes too far is marked. Even now, thinking about that town sends a chill through me. I sometimes dream of the basement, the cold floor, the symbols, the smell of decayed offerings and charred meat. I hear whispers of old chants in the night and feel the weight of unseen eyes. I wish I could say I walked away safely, that the darkness stayed behind me. But it follows in subtle ways. Shadows flicker at the edge of my vision. Sometimes I swear I hear chanting or footsteps in my empty apartment. I have friends who live near the town who call me with rumors. Someone has gone missing, a child found wandering the edge of the woods, a strange light in the church steeple. The old families still watch, still guard the secrets. What's terrifying is that the town thrives on this darkness. Power, wealth, social influence, it all comes from the fear and the silence. They've built their lives atop bones and blood, and everyone else is complicit, whether they know it or not. People smile, shake hands, and nod politely on the street while knowing more than they let on. And those who question too much? They disappear, quietly, like they were never there. I've thought about returning, about exposing the truth to law enforcement or national media. But I know it's too late. Too much time has passed. The families are entrenched. Their influence extends beyond the town. And the evidence I once had is weak in the eyes of anyone who doesn't know the full story. Even if I went public, the town would close ranks. My voice would vanish in the tide of silence, just like everyone else who dared to speak. Sometimes I drive past the area in my dreams, seeing the chapel's steeple against the night sky, dark and unwelcoming. The cemetery slopes, the twisted oaks, the basement that holds secrets older than anyone alive today. I remember my grandfather's study, the smell of his pipe tobacco, the weight of the journal in my hands, and the realization that evil can hide behind kindness in places you trust most. I tell this story not to scare you for no reason, but to warn you. If you ever find yourself in a town where the same families have controlled everything for generations, pay attention. Watch the foundations of their churches, their town halls, community centers. Look at who never answers questions, who everyone seems afraid of. Sometimes what looks like tradition, heritage, or faith is just a cover for something far more sinister. The people who know the truth will protect it at any cost. And if that cost includes your life, well, you'll never see it coming. The chapel is still there, services still echo, the families still smile politely on Sundays, and beneath the floorboards, the darkness waits, patient, unmoving, and alive. I was Millie, a granddaughter of a pastor, a town resident, a seeker of truth. And I live with the knowledge that some places are cursed by their own histories, that some sins are too deep to ever be cleansed, that some churches, no matter how beautiful, no matter how welcoming, are built on the bones of the past. And so I warn you, never trust the stories you're told. Never assume the old families, the revered institutions, or the polished traditions are harmless. Look closer. Listen. Pay attention.
Because the things people bury in silence have a way of coming back. And the people who protect them? They are willing to kill to keep their secrets hidden.
My name's Henry, and what I'm about to share defies everything I thought I knew about reality. I've spent years trying to rationalize what I stumbled across one bitter morning in Lackawanna County. No matter how many theories I spin or how many experts I pull in, I keep hitting the same wall. Some things just don't make sense. Some mysteries are never meant to be unraveled. I'm a hunter. Grew up traipsing through the woods of northeastern Pennsylvania since I was 12, taught by my dad and my granddad, both lifelong woodsmen. I know these forests like the back of my hand, every ridge, every frozen creek, every hidden trail. I'm practical. I deal with tracks, weather, animal patterns, the tangible world. I don't spook easy, and I sure don't jump to ghosts or goblins. But what I saw on February 14th, 2011, it shattered everything I thought I knew. That winter was brutal. Temperatures had been stuck below zero for weeks. Lakes and ponds were frozen solid, some with ice pushing nearly 2 feet thick. I had set out early to check my trap line along the west shore of Chapman Lake, a tiny body of water about 6 miles from the nearest town. The sun was just peeking over the tree line, long shadows spilling across the snow, and my breath puffed like smoke in the frozen air. Walking along the southern edge, I noticed something dark in the ice about 20 feet from shore. At first, I figured it was a branch or some junk frozen in. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't wood. It was a body. A man, standing upright, perfectly preserved, encased in ice like he'd been frozen mid-step. My heart jumped. My first thought was to call the cops, but no signal. I approached carefully, heart hammering, kneeling to get a better look. The ice was crystal clear in some spots, murky in others. I could make out enough detail to know this wasn't a recent accident. The man looked middle-aged, dressed like he'd stepped out of a different era. A brown wool suit jacket, a white dress shirt, dark trousers, and handmade leather shoes. His eyes were closed, face calm, almost peaceful. It was like he'd simply nodded off beneath the ice. The preservation was insane. No bloating, no discoloration, no rot. His skin was pale but intact. His features were sharp. Whoever he was, he'd been frozen instantly at the moment of death, locked in time. I hustled back to my truck and drove to the nearest ranger station to report it. Within an hour, the lake was swarming with cops, rangers, and EMTs. They cordoned off the area, hauled in chainsaws and ice-cutting gear, and spent the day carefully freeing the man from his frozen prison. I gave my statement, pointing out exactly where I'd found him, what I'd seen, and watched the extraction. His body went to the county medical examiner's lab for autopsy and identification. I thought that would be it. A missing person, an unfortunate accident, case closed. But 2 days later, I got a call from a state police detective, Sergeant Crawford, asking me to come in for more questions. At the station, Crawford led me to a small conference room. Inside were a forensic anthropologist from the University of Pennsylvania and an FBI agent. They asked me to recount everything, which I did: location, condition, clothing. Then they pulled up photos from the autopsy. And that's when it got really weird. The medical examiner had ruled death by hypothermia. Likely he fell through the ice and couldn't climb out. But the dating didn't make sense. The body looked freshly deceased, as if it had died in the last year, maybe the last few months. But the clothing screamed something else. The jacket, trousers, and shoes were straight out of the 1950s. Stitching patterns, fabric, the dye, everything matched mid-century manufacturing. They ran fingerprints and dental records to identify him. And that's when reality twisted. The prints matched a Thomas Edward Larkin, reported missing in January 2011.
a 63-year-old retired accountant from Scranton who'd gone fishing on Chapman Lake and vanished. His truck was found near the launch, no signs of him, and searches were called off due to unsafe ice conditions. On paper, it should have been simple. Missing man, accident, body recovered a month later. But there was a problem. Thomas Larkin in 2011 didn't wear 1950s clothes. He wore modern fishing gear. He drove a 2007 Ford. But the frozen man? Vintage suit, shoes, fabrics decades old. FBI agent Special Agent Reeves asked if I'd seen anything else odd that morning. I shook my head. Just the frozen body. The lake had been untouched besides my own footprints and a few deer tracks. Dr. Callahan, the anthropologist, laid it out bluntly. Carbon dating, fiber analysis, everything confirmed the clothing's mid-century origin. Yet the DNA matched Larkin perfectly. Dental records lined up too. X-rays from just 2 years prior confirmed his identity beyond a doubt. They asked me not to speak publicly about the case. I agreed, but I was rattled. How could a man vanish in 2011 and be dressed in clothes not made in over 50 years? Where did the suit come from? Who dressed him like that? And how had the body preserved so perfectly in such a short time? The months that followed only made things stranger. Theories emerged, none satisfying. Some said he collected vintage clothing and had been wearing it while fishing. Family swore he hadn't. He wore insulated coveralls and a winter jacket that day. Others proposed the body had been in the ice far longer, maybe decades, but that collapsed when dental and DNA evidence confirmed the modern identity. Dr. Callahan floated a theory that made my skin crawl. She suggested a temporal anomaly, a glitch in the flow of time. Maybe the extreme cold and electromagnetic conditions near Chapman Lake created a pocket where time folded, where past and present overlapped. She had no proof, just speculation, but admitted she couldn't explain it any other way. The case was quietly shelved. FBI pulled out. State police closed their report, marking death as accidental drowning due to hypothermia, ignoring the clothing discrepancy. Larkin's family received the body for burial. A small funeral was held in Scranton, attended by a handful of relatives and friends. I went. I didn't know them, but I wanted to honor the man I'd discovered. I spoke briefly with his daughter, Rebecca. She thanked me, tears in her eyes, and admitted the clothing mystery made no sense. "None of it makes sense, but at least we can bury him now," she said. I've walked the shore of Chapman Lake many times since. The spot where I found him is unchanged. The lake freezes every winter, thaws in spring, indifferent to the mystery it keeps. Fishermen avoid the area. Strange lights appear over the ice. Voices are said to whisper beneath it. I can't confirm any of that, but I know what I found. Time, I've come to believe, isn't as linear as we think. Places exist where past and present overlap, where impossibilities become real. Chapman Lake is one of them. Thomas Larkin, frozen in ice, dressed in the past, is proof that sometimes the world reveals truths science can't touch. After that winter morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that Chapman Lake was watching me. I kept returning, standing at the edge of the frozen water, staring down at the spot where Larkin had been trapped in time. Some mornings, the ice seemed almost alive, faint ripples curling beneath the surface as if the lake itself breathed. I told myself it was my imagination. I wanted to believe that. But deep down, I knew something unnatural had happened here. Local legends began surfacing once people heard about my discovery. Old-timers muttered about frozen men and ghosts trapped in ice, stories parents used to scare kids into leaving the lake alone. Fishermen claimed lights danced across the ice at night, strange glimmers that had no earthly source. Others swore they heard whispers carried on the wind, voices calling names long gone. I didn't want to believe any of it, but every hair on my neck stood on end when I walked the trail alone, and the tracks of animals would sometimes stop abruptly near the water's edge, as if even deer felt the weight of whatever lingered there. A month after Larkin's funeral, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled in jagged handwriting. Inside was a single Polaroid photo of Chapman Lake at night. The ice was black in the photo, except for a dim glow beneath the surface. The handwriting on the back said, "Some things are better left buried. Stop asking." I shoved it into a drawer and tried to ignore it, but it rattled me more than I'd like to admit. Someone had been watching. Or maybe something had been. Determined to understand, I started keeping detailed notes, recording temperatures, ice thickness, even electromagnetic readings near the lake. Sometimes, my equipment would spike inexplicably. My compass would spin wildly, my GPS flickered, and my phone would die for no reason. On one particularly frigid morning, I was measuring ice thickness near the area Larkin had been found when I felt a sharp chill rush up my spine, like a fist of cold air had punched me through my jacket. I spun around. No one was there. The wind was calm, yet my breath frosted violently, swirling in front of me. The feeling wasn't natural. It was watching, waiting. The strangest part? Tracks started appearing in the snow around the lake. Not human, not animal. Deep impressions, wide apart, moving with impossible gait. Sometimes they led to the edge of the ice, then vanished as if the surface had swallowed them whole. I followed them one day, heart hammering, but they never reappeared. They weren't mine. They weren't deer. They were something else. Then came the dreams. Every night, the same scene haunted me. A man in a brown suit, frozen in ice, reaching upward with glassy eyes, mouthing words I couldn't understand. I'd wake drenched in sweat, convinced he was trying to speak to me, to warn me. On more than one occasion, I swear I heard scraping under my floorboards, faint, deliberate, as if someone, or something, was moving just below the surface of reality. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a headlamp, my rifle, and hiked to the lake under a full moon. The ice shimmered silver in the moonlight, and I could see shadows moving beneath it. I knelt at the edge, tapping my fingers against the surface, trying to call out to whatever force had claimed Larkin. That's when I heard it. The sound of cracking ice, not beneath me but somewhere deeper, like the lake itself was bending. Then a voice, faint but distinct, whispered my name. "Henry." I stumbled back, heart racing, and the wind kicked up suddenly, carrying a smell of old earth and something far fouler, like frozen decay mixed with ozone. My flashlight flickered, then went out, leaving me in absolute darkness. When it came back, the ice looked ordinary again, but I knew what I'd heard was real. Something had crossed into my world, something that didn't belong here. I reported the phenomena to Sergeant Crawford, hoping for guidance. He listened, silent, then warned me quietly. "Stay away from Chapman Lake. Don't touch it. Don't ask questions." When I pressed him, he finally admitted something unnerving. Locals had always known this lake wasn't normal. There were stories stretching back generations, men disappearing, sometimes entire families, always tied to the ice. But the authorities had buried the reports. "It's easier to pretend nothing's wrong," he said. "Some things the human mind can't handle. Some things shouldn't be handled." I didn't stop. I couldn't. I felt compelled, as though the lake itself was demanding acknowledgement. So I reached out to climatologists, physicists, and even a few quantum researchers. No one offered anything concrete. Some muttered about extreme cold creating strange molecular stasis. Others joked nervously about time anomalies and frozen temporal pockets. But everyone glanced at me like I had lost my mind.
Months turned into years.
I've returned every winter, year after year. I watch the ice freeze, the lake swallowing the world in glassy silence, and each year it feels heavier. I've seen faint movements beneath the surface again, shapes that vanish when I approach, shadows stretching in ways physics doesn't allow. Local wildlife avoids that section of the lake entirely. The place is a dead zone. I've spoken to other hunters, but only in whispers. They call Chapman Lake cursed, haunted, a place where time is broken. One old-timer told me he'd found deer frozen mid-leap in the snow there once, frost coating their eyes like marble statues. No explanation, just frozen moments like the man in the ice.
I've stopped trying to rationalize it.
Chapman Lake is a wound in the world, a place where something unnatural has claimed dominion. Larkin's body, dressed in clothes from another era, is a warning and a marker. The past and present here overlap, and the lake is patient, precise, waiting. Time bends there. Death and life, past and present, all mingle in that frozen silence. Sometimes, when I stare at the lake at dusk, I see movement beneath the ice. Not water, not fish, something larger, something deliberate. And I hear the faintest echo of a voice, a plea, a warning, a reminder that some doors should never be opened. Chapman Lake doesn't forget, and neither do I.